Imagine for a moment that the invisible networks connecting the entire global economy suddenly shatter and completely collapse. At the local pump, the price of fuel climbs into double digits within a matter of days. The ability to order an item from halfway across the world and have it arrive in 3 days relies on a fragile, man-made architecture. This system is a construct maintained by a specific global order. If the United States steps back from its role as the dominant power, the systems that move $25 trillion in annual trade are left without a foundation. To understand why trade breaks down, we have to look at the force that keeps the lanes open. In news cycles, Russia is often labeled a superpower, a peer to the United States. China receives the same designation, framed as a competing global authority. In military and economic terms, the era following the Cold War has been defined by a single global leader, with one notable exception in pop culture. Because the ability to project force across every ocean is concentrated in one nation, the global supply chain is tethered to a single point of failure. This ship can travel thousands of miles through open water because of the persistent reach of the US Navy. If that presence is removed, a vacuum opens across the world's most vital waterways. Regional border disputes and old rivalries, long held in check by a dominant external force, break out into active conflict. Shipping lanes turn into combat zones as nations move to claim territory that was previously treated as international commons. The risk to cargo becomes unquantifiable. Insurance companies stop covering ships in these areas, making it impossible for a commercial fleet to leave the dock. The loss of a central enforcer destroys the financial trust required to move goods between continents. The instability moves from the high seas into your daily routine. As international routes fail, domestic stocks of everything from electronics to basic medicine disappear. Global trade has never been a self-sustaining free market. The system is a military project, with one nation paying the security costs that keep consumer prices low. Without American hegemony, the world shifts into a collection of isolated, expensive regions, ending the era of accessible global goods. Ask someone what makes a nation an overpowered global force, and they will likely point to the size of its army or its weapons. But true supremacy is a mastery of geography and time. It relies on a logistical network reaching any point on Earth almost instantly. Imagine if the United States suddenly adopted strict isolationism, pulling every soldier, ship, and aircraft back within its borders. This would create an immediate logistical vacuum in the world's most critical shipping lanes and trade corridors. There is a simple macroeconomic reality. When nations fight, supply chains break and markets crash. When nations remain peaceful, global economies thrive. The United States economy is deeply integrated into these international networks. Because American wealth relies on global trade flowing smoothly, the US economy suffers whenever that stability fractures. To protect those massive financial interests, a military cannot simply wait on its own shores for distant threats to arrive. It has to engineer a system to be everywhere at once, acting as a deterrent to conflict before it can spark. The American military is engineered specifically for this task. It acts as a continuous, physical stabilizing force for global trade. This map illustrates the definitive metric of American power projection. Watch the deployment radiuses expand from US hubs as the 48-hour countdown ticks down. The US can place several thousand troops and hundreds of combat aircraft into any of these major global flashpoints in exactly 2 days. Heavy airlift capabilities, like fleets of enormous C-130 transport planes, make this rapid global mobilization possible, hauling massive amounts of equipment and personnel across oceans overnight. By utilizing airborne infantry, the US military bypasses a major geographical hurdle. They do not need to wait for access to friendly runways to establish an immediate ground presence. This level of aerial dominance places US combat forces just one short helicopter ride away from being in virtually any location on the map. But oceans cover 70% of the globe. That creates vast expanses where the US lacks friendly land bases to launch these air operations. To solve this, the US Navy utilizes aircraft carriers. These function as sovereign, mobile landmasses, allowing America to bring its own self-contained air force right to any coastline on Earth. You can see how difficult global logistical projection truly is when you compare this self-contained system against the geographical limitations of rival nations. Take China, for example. They have been rapidly expanding their naval fleet, but it remains a coastal force that requires friendly land-based air support to operate safely. Looking at this comparative map, the issue becomes obvious. Chinese naval vessels depend on land-based support, which restricts how far their fleet can travel. The US Navy, however, brings its own massive air force to the sea, allowing for unrestricted global mobility. Shifting this map over to Eastern Europe, we see Russia dealing with a completely different geographical reality, conducting military operations directly across its own borders. Yet, despite that immediate proximity, the Russian military has spent over 3 years struggling to capture territory that amounts to just a fraction of the size of its neighbor. True superpower status is defined by the logistical capacity to sustain military power far from home shores, a capability the United States currently holds alone. Visualizing these global threat indicators on a radar shows the primary strategic goal of American military reach, keeping violent conflict isolated and contained on the far sides of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Forward deployed troops act as the physical manifestation of this strategy, maintaining a constant, watchful presence in distant and volatile regions around the world. This creates a psychological deterrent. The looming guarantee of a massive, overwhelming military response arriving within 48 hours changes the calculus for any aggressive state. Because of this logistical reach, few rival nations have the resources or the nerve to test the peace enforced by that presence. The American military functions as a highly engineered global logistical shield. It maintains the stability that keeps the modern economy turning and enforces a global peace that benefits the entire world. When we think of global supremacy, our minds usually go straight to the hardware, a carrier strike group carving through the ocean, or the ability to drop a payload on a target halfway across the planet. But kinetic force has hard limits. You can't park a destroyer off a foreign coast and force a country to buy your exports, and a missile strike certainly won't convince a foreign population to adopt your values. True, lasting global rule relies on something much quieter. To build an empire that actually endures, a nation needs an invisible framework supported by 2 highly specific, non-military weapons. First, you need the mechanical ability to instantly cut off a rival economy from the rest of the world. Second, you need a cultural engine so appealing that foreign citizens actively seek out your way of life. Without these 2 mechanisms, even the largest standing army on Earth leaves a nation acting as a regional heavyweight, constantly struggling to project actual global authority. Over the last 20 years, China's economic modernization has moved at a staggering pace. Cities have multiplied, manufacturing supply chains have dominated, and their financial footprint has expanded heavily. Yet, despite this massive trajectory, Beijing remains a geopolitical challenger rather than an equal peer to the United States. This chart shows the currency breakdown of international transactions. An overwhelming volume of global trade is settled exclusively in US dollars, while only a tiny fraction is conducted in the Chinese yuan. This gap creates a hard structural ceiling. You can manufacture a significant portion of the world's goods, but if those goods are bought and sold using another nation's money, your influence is ultimately capped by their financial plumbing. This dollar dominance gives Washington a mechanical advantage. When the US Treasury decides to impose sanctions, those penalties rarely act in isolation. They trigger an immediate, worldwide cascade. A financial action in Washington instantly cascades through a global network of banks, severing the target nation from the international marketplace overnight. China can exert intense economic pressure, but that pressure is heavily reliant on direct physical trade flows rather than sweeping global dictates, keeping their leverage mostly contained to their immediate region. Global currency adoption acts as the ultimate enforcer of international compliance. It's a quiet lever that makes physical military threats secondary in modern geopolitical conflicts. The second pillar of this invisible empire lives entirely inside people's heads. It is the raw power of cultural and ideological appeal. We can see exactly how this works by looking back at the Cold War. Hollywood operated as a highly effective strategic tool in the American arsenal, exporting a highly idealized way of life directly into foreign living rooms. While intercontinental ballistic missiles maintained a tense standoff, American ideals of individualism and consumerism bypassed those defenses entirely, spreading far more effectively through movie screens than through military deterrence. Today, that exact same cultural blueprint actively maintains American unipolarity. The delivery methods have expanded. Television and video games, fashion and chart-topping music all serve as massive, continuous vehicles for soft power. The mechanism at play is brilliant because it requires zero coercion. These cultural products embed American aesthetics, values, and aspirations directly into the daily lives of foreign citizens who actually pay for the privilege of consuming them. Look at the sheer longevity of this intellectual property. From vintage comic book heroes to massive summer blockbusters, international audiences consistently gravitate toward American actors and American storytelling formats. This cultural saturation creates a voluntary global desire to participate in the American system. It secures an ideological alignment a conquering army simply cannot force. When you bring these two pillars together, the architecture of the invisible empire becomes clear. Culture generates the global desire for the American way of life, and the dollar rigidly enforces the financial system that sustains it. There are certainly rival nations with rapidly growing economies and massive standing armies, but hardware and factories alone represent an incomplete form of power. Right now, no other nation possesses this exact combination. No one else has both the sweeping cultural magnetism and the heavily interlocked financial network of the United States. When you measure that full, holistic spectrum, military, financial, and cultural reach, there is only one reigning superpower on the board. True superpower status is defined by structural control. It relies entirely on the ability to compel the rest of the world to actively participate in your system long after the troops have gone home. Historically speaking, every global empire eventually falls. Today, many assume American supremacy is a permanent fixture of the modern world, as if the country is immune to the cycles of history. That status is facing severe challenges, driven largely by poor domestic decision-making and systemic internal neglect. Modern superpower decline is almost always a combination of slow internal bleeding and a sudden, devastating external strike. This raises a very specific, urgent question. What exact sequence of events would trigger the loss of that superpower status today? The downfall of a modern superpower occurs through a cascade of invisible, compounding systemic failures. National deficits remain sustainable only as long as interest payments do not grow faster than the domestic economy itself. Tracking domestic growth against the cost of servicing foreign debt, the U.S. is nearing a threshold where climbing debt interest outpaces economic expansion, forcing Washington into an unsustainable spending spiral. Crossing this threshold risks shaking global confidence in America's ability to pay its IOUs. A loss of faith in U.S. debt destabilizes the dollar and the global economic order built upon it. This debt burden leaves the nation's economic foundation hollowed out and acutely vulnerable before a single shot is ever fired. These internal cracks set the stage for an external catalyst, a military conflict with China. Even in victory, the staggering financial cost of rebuilding an expensive military would cripple an economy already drowning in debt. Asymmetric physical threats compound this financial risk, particularly given the U.S. Navy's historically spotty track record against enemy submarines. Chinese submarines could slip past defensive pickets in the Pacific to close the distance to the American coast. This proximity allows for the launch of long-range missiles directly at critical infrastructure on the U.S. mainland. Modern naval capabilities bring the threat of devastating kinetic strikes directly to the American homeland, ending the era of isolated ocean front lines. A massive cyber attack launched in tandem with these physical strikes would target the nation's digital nervous system. Digital sabotage would target civil infrastructure, hijacking the control systems for hydroelectric dams and electric substations. This tactic is a deadly threat to an economy that is now almost entirely dominated by information technology. Disabling the power grid through cyber-sabotage brings the American IT economy to its knees, achieving an empire-ending outcome without the need for a ground invasion. Sustaining a cyber attack while already burdened by insurmountable national debt triggers a total systemic collapse. In this scenario, the long-term economic devastation of the conflict far outpaces the tragedy of immediate military losses. The ultimate threat to a modern superpower is a nation burdened by its own financial ledgers, relying on a digitally exposed power grid. America's loss of superpower status would stem from a nation financially hollowed from within and digitally paralyzed from without. Artificial intelligence and energy breakthroughs are the focal points of a new technological race. These advancements are expected to dictate the future of everything from global commerce to modern warfare. In the 20th century, missing a leap of this scale would have been like ignoring the invention of the jet engine, or being entirely left behind during the arrival of room-sized mainframe computers. While falling behind in AI might not cause an immediate collapse, it creates a gap in capability that, over time, becomes mathematically impossible to close. For decades, American influence has been tied to leading these kinds of technological revolutions. If the US loses this specific frontier, its position as a global superpower is at risk. This dominance didn't happen by accident. It began at the end of the Second World War. While much of the world was recovering from the destruction shown here, the United States was busy recruiting the scientists and engineers escaping it. By offering stability and research opportunities that couldn't be found in war-torn Europe, American universities and companies became the primary destination for the world's most talented professionals. By transforming into a global sanctuary for the world's best minds, the US built a technological lead that defined the post-war era. Today, that strategy has been replaced by a system that actively discourages the very talent the country once recruited. This flowchart shows the reality for foreign STEM professionals. High failure rates and quotas make securing an H-1B visa frustrating. Even for top graduates, the pathway to a green card hits a dead end. Additional red tape adds years to this broken process. This level of hostility is having a measurable psychological effect. Instead of waiting years for a chance to stay, many highly qualified candidates are simply looking for options elsewhere. The immigration system has moved from a strategic advantage to a self-sabotaging barrier at a time when global competition for talent has never been higher. Other nations have noticed this shift and are moving to capitalize on America's bureaucratic failures. As data lines on this map show, countries like Canada, Australia, and European nations are successfully redirecting STEM students who would have chosen the US. Most notably, China is aggressively recruiting top-tier professionals by offering resources and stability missing from the American system. These rivals are providing the clear pathways and greener pastures that the United States is no longer willing to offer. In the modern economy, specialized talent is the most contested resource on Earth, and for the first time in decades, the US is losing its share of the market. The continuous loss of these specialists is creating a decline in the technological edge the US has relied on since the 1940s. As this brain drain persists, it threatens to end the era where American corporations hold a near-total grip on the global tech market. This Microsoft store represents a level of global corporate dominance that currently seems unshakable, but it is actually quite fragile. That dominance was built on breakthroughs seen in devices like this Macintosh, innovations only possible because the US successfully attracted the world's best engineers. If foreign adversaries win the AI race because they successfully recruited the talent America turned away, they will be the ones building the devices that dictate daily life and warfare in the coming decades. Unless the US repairs its talent pipeline, its superpower status won't be lost on a battlefield. It will be lost in a pile of visa applications and bureaucratic red tape. Right now, in the Red Sea, Houthi rebels are actively firing rockets at commercial vessels. These localized strikes are directly severing the physical routes that keep global trade moving, halting massive cargo ships in their tracks. While these attacks feel like regional skirmishes, they reveal a massive underlying dependency. For decades, the invisible weight keeping these flashpoints from paralyzing the entire world has been the physical presence and security guarantees of a single superpower, the United States. If that superpower status were to fold, we wouldn't just see a change in leadership. we would see an instant, catastrophic chain reaction across every system we rely on. We would see pandemonium. The first domino to fall is the United States dollar. If the US loses its status as the world's primary security provider, the dollar likely tanks as the global reserve currency. To see why that matters, look at this data from 2022. A full 54% of global trade is conducted in dollars. If the dollar is removed, over half of all commerce would suddenly need alternative currencies. The banking system would struggle to manage that transition, creating immediate and massive economic chaos. Without a dominant currency to anchor the system, nations would be forced to aggressively back their own money to survive, turning international competition into all-out trade wars. This isn't just a loss for Wall Street, it is the permanent shattering of the trust required to conduct peaceful international commerce. The shockwave of that global crash would immediately hit the American homeland. Losing the ability to trade in its own currency would cause a sharp, devastating spike in the cost of every imported good. This sudden inflation would put a breaking point strain on a middle class already struggling with the existing cost of living. When a middle class loses its financial floor, the social contract begins to fray. Existing political tensions cease to be debates and become a struggle for survival, leading to outbreaks of domestic violence. Under the compounding weight of financial ruin and civil unrest, the nation would likely fracture internally. It is this domestic collapse, potentially even a second civil war, that would finally prevent America from projecting any power abroad. As the homeland fractures, American diplomatic leverage would evaporate. Its influence over global finance institutions, like the International Monetary Fund, would sharply wane. Without control of those financial levers, the US loses its ability to economically punish hostile nations for bad actions, like invading their neighbors. That diplomatic void would be matched by a physical one, the collapse of the US military security umbrella worldwide. Look at the Baltic states. Their continued independence is currently guaranteed entirely by American military prowess and treaty alliances. For decades, their safety has never truly been in question. But if the US collapses as a superpower, those security guarantees, including the nuclear umbrella that deters mass attacks, suddenly break down with dire consequences. Without economic leverage to freeze assets or the military might to enforce borders, the very concept of international deterrence ceases to exist. This is a return to the Westphalian age of nation-state warfare, an era where border expansion by force is the historical norm. For the last several decades, the US military has actively suppressed large-scale war, creating a historical anomaly of peace that we often take for granted. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is a preview of this reality. That conflict occurred precisely because Ukraine was outside of the US security umbrella, leading Moscow to believe it could take the capital by force. Contrast that with the current safety of treaty allies who fall under American protection. Their borders remain untouched solely because of the deterrent power of that alliance. Without that deterrent, the forecast is bleak. Europe would likely see major, devastating regional wars return at regular intervals, just as it has for most of its history. American hegemony is not just a title, it is the sole structural barrier currently preventing the world from sliding back into an era of endless conflict. American global leadership has always been a matter of calculated self-interest. By acting as the world's primary stabilizer, the US ensured that its own economic and security needs were met through a system of mutual benefit. This arrangement created an open, predictable trade environment that fueled American prosperity. The wealth generated on the floors of the New York Stock Exchange was a direct result of this engineered global stability. There is a secondary advantage to this outward projection of power. It actually prevents conflict. The mere threat of American presence often deters regional wars before they begin, meaning the US has to police fewer active battlefields. Political scientists refer to this as hegemonic stability. Look at this network map. A single dominant central node keeps the smaller, more volatile nodes in a steady orbit, preventing them from colliding and sparking wider chaos. Maintaining these international norms serves as a strategic shield. It guarantees American safety and wealth by keeping the rest of the world functioning under a predictable set of rules. America is currently pivoting toward a narrower, more inward-looking definition of its own interests. This shift prioritizes domestic concerns while deprioritizing the global responsibilities that once anchored the system. This retreat involves the deliberate abandonment of long-standing international agreements. These are the very institutions and diplomatic norms that the US spent nearly a century building to maintain order. There is a core misunderstanding behind this policy, the belief that stepping back will insulate the country. In reality, withdrawing from these systems sets off a rapid destabilization of the entire global foundation. When you remove the central keystone from a structural arch, the integrity of the entire building is compromised. Geopolitics works the same way. Pulling this single linchpin causes the global order to buckle under its own weight. By walking away from its role as the global anchor, the US is actively turning its greatest geopolitical asset into a compounding liability. Global influence follows a fluid dynamic. Power abhors a vacuum. When one player exits the stage, the surrounding forces instantly rush in to occupy that empty space. The withdrawal of an active American deterrent clears a path for unregulated territorial claims. Regional powers begin testing boundaries that were once considered untouchable. For decades, the presence of a US aircraft carrier served as the ultimate physical deterrent. Removing these assets leaves a significant strategic void that smaller nations and rivals are eager to fill. This creates a zero-friction environment for expansion. Without the threat of American reprisal, aggressive nations can move to seize resources and territory with little to no consequence. Isolationism removes the very barricades that once kept foreign threats at a distance. It leaves the US exposed to a world that is becoming more aggressive by the day. China and Russia have been positioned for years to exploit this exact opening. Their current alignment is a direct response to the American retreat as they prepare to step into the vacancy. Their immediate strategy is to rewrite the rules of global engagement. They want a system that favors their specific interests, essentially acting as the new referees for international trade and diplomacy. These new rules prioritize authoritarian expansion. They seek to dismantle the democratic norms and transparency that previously allowed Western markets to flourish. This new order is enforced through bold military posturing. We are seeing a significant escalation in rival confidence, with destructive capabilities being displayed more openly than at any point since the Cold War. The endgame for these opportunists is the systematic exclusion of the United States. They aim to redraw the global economic map, securing resource routes that effectively lock American businesses out of the world's most vital markets. The greatest danger here is not a direct invasion, but the loss of control. The US risks becoming an outsider in a world order it once defined. Global chaos cannot be contained by simply looking away. The instability created by a retreating America eventually breaches domestic borders, proving that isolation is an illusion. When regional order collapses, international supply chains break down. These systemic failures translate directly into extensive domestic economic shockwaves, triggering skyrocketing prices and shortages of essential goods right here at home. As these economic crises evolve into desperate regional resource wars, American core interests come under direct threat. This forces a frantic, defensive re-engagement on multiple fronts simultaneously, as the US tries to protect its remaining trade links. The attempt to avoid policing the world results in a reactive, desperate defense. The US finds itself pulled into conflicts that are far more widespread and resource-intensive than the ones it initially tried to avoid. The loss of superpower status has an immediate, visceral impact. Geopolitical consequences become personal the moment the nation can no longer sustain its own defense. Stabilizing a world that has become this aggressive requires a level of manpower that the current all-volunteer force cannot provide. The military demands of a multi-front conflict quickly exceed the supply of recruits. This leads to the ultimate consequence of pulling the geopolitical linchpin. To meet these new military demands, the government would be forced to restart the mandatory military draft. A modern draft would trigger severe domestic upheaval. The resulting societal resistance and internal chaos would tear at the very fabric of American life. While this domestic crisis unfolds, our rivals remain free to finish reshaping the world. They continue to paint the map in their own colors, while the US remains paralyzed by the consequences of its own retreat. Find out exactly what happens to you if the US restarts the draft, or click on this video instead.